Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Shawn Broussard, and welcome to my Senior Project podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about the Vietnam War, its veterans, and how they were treated when they came home. This is a topic that has become very important to me in the past few years because of my junior project that I did as a part of the Clayton Arts Academy, and my lifelong admiration for those who have served in the military. So, let's just get right into this. I guess the first thing that we should talk about is that when Vietnam veterans returned home, they faced so many obstacles. First of all, many veterans were not welcomed home when they came home, especially after the Vietnam War, because there was so much discrimination against them that some were actually even abandoned by their own families. Second of all, they were unable to get jobs because no one wanted to hire them, you know? And adding to this issue, the average soldier's age in Vietnam was 19. This meant that many soldiers actually had no college education, and some hadn't even finished high school. Many of them were unable to afford an education or get accepted by colleges. So with no family, no education, and no job, many veterans actually just became homeless. The Vietnam War was one of the most divided periods in American history. There were protesters at airports almost 24 hours a day. Soldiers were harassed, attacked, and called names in airports when they arrived back in the United States. Simon Saluksagan, an artillery sergeant, stated, "When I got home, nobody gave a shit. I did get hassled when I got home." And a veteran that I've interviewed last year as a part of my junior project, who only actually introduced himself as Mike, explained to me that he was brought home by a boat in the San Francisco harbor. He told me that when his ship went under the Golden Gate Bridge, protesters dumped buckets of red paint down on the ship, symbolizing the blood that they were accused to have spilled over in Vietnam. So one of the people that I interviewed for this project was named Debbie Bauer. Debbie is a therapist for the Wounded Warriors Project. She explained that contrary to popular belief, being attacked and hassled in airports was actually not a common experience. The most common and devastating response Vietnam veterans received was no response at all. Many soldiers were met with cold silence and indifference to their service. Jonathan Watkins put it this way: "Some people don't know what to say, but I don't think it's because of me being a veteran. If someone told me that they were a professional badminton player, I might not know what to say myself. That's just because I'm not familiar with badminton and I have no relation with it." Jonathan, for context, Jonathan worked as a nuclear reactor operator during Operation Enduring Freedom. And so I think what he's saying there is, people aren't just deliberately mean and rude to veterans. It's just, they don't know how to talk about the topic. So the intense division around the Vietnam War actually had some massive implications for returning veterans. Because many veterans had little to no education, they had a hard time finding careers after the military. Some soldiers couldn't find any job at all because no one wanted to hire them. Many veterans became homeless as a result. It was a bad situation to be in. Soldiers had no job, no money, no education, no home, and nowhere to go. Many veterans even turned to drugs and crime and just to survive. In fact, 25% of the soldiers who came home from Vietnam were arrested on criminal charges within 10 years of returning, mostly for drug-related offenses. The DPIC, the Death Penalty Information Center, estimates there are some 300 veterans on death row today. However, those lucky few veterans who had college educations, homes, and a viable career path to fall back on still faced extreme discrimination in the workplace. One veteran named Tom Burns returned to his job as an accountant in 1969 when he came home and was met with harsh judgment even from World War II veterans. Veterans also suffer from mental illnesses like PTSD and substance abuse. In Vietnam, drugs like marijuana, opium, and heroin were all very cheap and very easy to obtain. This created a problem where a lot of soldiers developed drug addictions while overseas, especially in Vietnam. And this is still a problem that veterans, even from the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, face. They turn to drugs or alcohol just to try and cope with the trauma of war. According to the VA, about 70% of veterans suffer from PTSD, and some 45% face drug abuse. And due to the lack of public knowledge or understanding of mental illnesses following the Vietnam War, a lot of veterans never received care for these illnesses and still haven't to this day. Although recently there have been more efforts to improve the lives of veterans, PTSD was recognized by the VA in 1979. However, it wasn't widely accepted by the public until the early 90s. And in April of 2009, President Obama promised a unified lifetime electronic health record for armed servicemen and women, quote, from the day they first enlist to the day that they are laid to rest. Additionally, a clear majority of the public now understands that PTSD is real and it's a problem. This is partially because many people felt guilty for how Vietnam veterans were treated. This caused a large wave of support for soldiers who fought in the wars following Vietnam, such as Korea, Iraq, and Afghanistan. Vietnam veterans actually have been the driving force behind the massive outpouring of support for Iraq and Afghanistan veterans. Vietnam veterans have vowed that, quote, never again will a generation of soldiers be treated the way we were. Unfortunately, the efforts to improve the VA system have been plagued with problems. For example, over 1/3 of people in the patient backlog at VA hospitals have already died, but no one bothers taking them off the list. According to the Washington Times, quote, a VA employee in Puerto Rico was reinstated with back pay last month after she was fired for being arrested for armed robbery. She pleaded guilty, but her union got her job back by arguing in a grievance that a manager at that same facility is a registered sex offender, and that another VA hospital manager was once arrested for drunk driving and was found to be in possession of pain pills. In Alexandria, Louisiana, a VA nursing assistant is still on the payroll while awaiting trial on manslaughter charges and the death of a 70-year-old Air Force veteran in 2013. Hospital officials initially called the veteran's death an accident, but a coroner determined the veteran died from blunt force trauma to the head, and that nurse is still on the payroll. She still has her job. And cases like these have been found throughout the VA system. Aside from the discipline issues, the VA has been found to be lying on treatment records. In 2014, a VA center in Phoenix, Arizona was caught lying about wait times and what kind of treatment certain veterans received. They stated on records that the veterans were treated quicker and more comprehensively than they really were. The number of backlog disability claims has come down, though. The wait for first-time applicants remains, on average, 389 days. It's over 770 days in Baltimore and 630 days in Boston. Meanwhile, the backlog for applied claims has skyrocketed to over 255,000. And most of the veterans on that list have been waiting for upwards of 3 years, according to an article on the National Review. All of this information leads us to where we are now. In January of 2014, communities across America identified 49,933 homeless veterans at the beginning of January. This represents 8.6% of the total homeless population. Nearly half of all homeless veterans served during the Vietnam era, and some 45% of all homeless veterans face drug or alcohol addiction. A staggering 70% face untreated mental illness, and although there have been more efforts to improve the VA system, the level of care is still way below acceptable. And unfortunately, there is no sign that any of this is going to get better soon. So, thank you for listening to my podcast. This is Shawn Broussard signing off.